What happens when a royal guest mistakes a comedy show for a throne room? In just 37 seconds, one comment turned a simple interview into television chaos that nobody saw coming. Bill Maher sat across from Prince Harry in his signature relaxed pose, ready for what should have been another engaging political conversation. The studio audience buzzed with excitement. A prince on a late-night talk show. What could go wrong? Everything. Bill started with a softball question, the kind he always uses to warm up his guests. So, you've been living in California for a while now. How are you adjusting to American life? Harry leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk crossing his face. Well, Bill, I have to say, it's been quite the education. You Americans think you know everything about freedom and democracy, but you've got a lot to learn. The audience went quiet. Bill raised an eyebrow, keeping his cool. Oh, really? Do tell. I mean, look at your media, Harry continued, his voice dripping with condescension. It's all just noise, isn't it? Back home, we have standards. We have class. Here, anyone with a camera thinks they're a journalist. Bill shifted in his seat, still maintaining his composure. Well, that's one perspective, though I'd argue a free press, messy as it is, beats a controlled one any day. Harry laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. Free press? Is that what you call it? More like a circus. And honestly, Bill, you're one of the ringleaders. The audience gasped. Bill's smile tightened, but he pressed on like the professional he is. I'm a ringleader? That's interesting coming from someone whose family drama has dominated tabloids for years. That's different, Harry shot back, his face reddening. We didn't ask for that attention. We're public servants. You, on the other hand, you manufacture controversy for ratings. Bill leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Public servants? Harry, with all due respect, you left that job. You moved to a mansion in Montecito. You signed Netflix deals. You're not exactly working the soup kitchens. Harry's jaw clenched. How dare you? Do you know what my family has sacrificed? Do you have any idea what it's like to live under that kind of scrutiny? Actually, Bill replied, I've been doing this show for over 20 years. I've been threatened, protested, and canceled more times than I can count. So yeah, I think I know a little something about scrutiny. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Harry wasn't backing down. That's not the same thing at all. You chose this. I was born into it. Everything I do is judged. Everything I say is twisted. Bill nodded slowly. Right. So you came on a talk show to complain about talk shows. That's a bold strategy. I came here because I thought you were different, Harry said, his voice rising. I thought you were intelligent. But you're just like the rest of them. Small-minded. Petty. Bill's expression hardened. Harry, I've given you a platform tonight. I've asked you fair questions. If you think that's petty, maybe the problem isn't me. The problem, Harry snapped, is that people like you think you can sit there and judge people like me. You make jokes about things you don't understand. You mock institutions that have stood for centuries. I mock institutions that deserve mocking, Bill countered. That's called accountability. Maybe you're not used to that. Harry stood up slightly in his chair, his finger pointing at Bill. You know nothing about accountability. You hide behind your comedy. You throw stones and then claim it's all just jokes. The audience was completely silent now. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Bill remained seated, his voice steady. I don't hide behind anything. I say what I think, and I deal with the consequences. Can you say the same? I've dealt with more consequences than you could ever imagine, Harry fired back. I've lost friends. I've lost family. I've been dragged through the mud by people who've never even met me. And whose fault is that? Bill asked, his tone sharp but measured. You went on Oprah. You wrote a book. You did a documentary series. You put yourself out there. That was your choice. Harry's face was fully red now, his composure crumbling. My choice? My choice? Do you think any of this was my choice? I was forced into this position by a system that chewed me up and spit me out. Bill shook his head. Nobody forced you to do those interviews, Harry. Nobody forced you to air your family's dirty laundry on international television. They gave me no choice, Harry shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. They pushed me out. They made my life hell. What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and take it? Maybe, Bill said quietly. You could have handled it with a little more dignity. That was the breaking point. Harry shot up from his chair, his face contorted with rage. Dignity? You're going to lecture me about dignity? You who makes a living mocking people on television? Bill stood up too, his voice firm but controlled. I mock people who deserve it. Politicians, hypocrites, people who abuse their power. And yeah, sometimes I mock people who complain about their privilege while living in luxury. I am not privileged, Harry screamed, his hands gesturing wildly. You have no idea what I've been through. None of you do. You sit here in your comfortable little studio, making your comfortable little jokes, and you think you understand the world. The audience was stunned into complete silence. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others looked shocked. Bill's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Harry, you flew here on a private jet. You're worth millions of dollars. You live in a mansion. You have security. You have opportunities most people can only dream of. So forgive me if I don't cry you a river. Harry's eyes blazed with fury. How dare you minimize my pain? How dare you sit there and tell me my suffering doesn't matter because I have money? I'm not saying your pain doesn't matter, Bill replied, his tone softening slightly. I'm saying you need some perspective. There are people out there with real problems. People who can't feed their kids. People who are losing their homes. People who are actually struggling. And what would you know about struggle? Harry spat. You've been on television for decades. You've never wanted for anything. Bill's expression turned cold. I grew up in New Jersey. My parents didn't have money. I worked my way up from nothing. So, yeah, Harry, I know about struggle. Real struggle. Not the kind where you're upset because the palace staff didn't treat you right. Harry's hands were shaking now. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This dismissiveness. This arrogance. You think because you had it hard once, you can judge everyone else. I'm not judging you for having it hard, Bill said, his voice rising. I'm judging you for acting like you're the only one who's ever had it hard. For coming on my show and insulting me, my audience, and my country. Your country? Harry laughed bitterly. This country is falling apart. Your politics are a joke. Your healthcare system is broken. Your gun violence is out of control. And you want to lecture me? Bill stepped closer, his voice sharp. At least we can criticize our leaders without getting thrown in a tower. At least we have the freedom to speak our minds. At least we don't bow to anyone. Freedom, Harry scoffed. You call this freedom? This is chaos. This is madness. You people don't know what you're doing. You need structure. You need order. You need people who actually know how to lead. People like you, Bill challenged. Is that what you think? That you're some kind of natural leader because you were born into the right family? Harry's voice was venomous now. I think I have more experience in leadership than a comedian who tells jokes for a living. Bill's patience had finally worn thin. You know what, Harry? I've had world leaders on this show. Presidents, prime ministers, activists, people who've actually changed the world. And not one of them has been as disrespectful as you've been tonight. Disrespectful? Harry's voice cracked. I'm disrespectful? You invited me here to mock me, to make me the butt of your jokes, to tear me down in front of your audience. I invited you here for a conversation, Bill said firmly. You're the one who turned it into an attack. You're the one who can't handle a simple question without losing your mind. Harry's breathing was heavy, his chest heaving. I don't have to sit here and take this. I don't have to listen to some talk show host tell me how to live my life. Then don't, Bill said simply. The door's right there. The studio fell into a deafening silence. Everyone waited to see what Harry would do next. Harry's eyes darted around the room, looking at the cameras, the audience, the crew. His face was a mixture of rage and humiliation. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? Bill didn't respond. He just stood there, waiting. Fine, Harry finally said, his voice dripping with contempt. I don't need this. I don't need you. I don't need any of you. He ripped off his microphone and threw it onto the chair. You can all sit here and worship your precious Bill Maher. But mark my words, people like him are what's wrong with this country. People who tear others down. People who have no respect for tradition, for honor, for anything that actually matters. Bill crossed his arms. If by tradition you mean being born special and expecting everyone to treat you like royalty, then yeah, I have no respect for that. Here in America, we left that behind a couple 100 years ago. That was it. That was the final straw. Harry's face twisted into pure fury. You're a disgrace. This show is a disgrace. This whole country is a disgrace. He turned to the audience. You should all be ashamed of yourselves for supporting this garbage. The audience erupted in boos. Not gentle boos. Loud, angry boos that filled the entire studio. Harry stormed toward the exit, his footsteps heavy and angry. But before he could reach the door, Bill called out one last time. Harry, one more thing. Harry spun around, his eyes wild. What? Bill's voice was calm, almost gentle. Thanks for stopping by. This'll be great for ratings. The audience exploded into cheers and applause. Some people stood up. Others whooped and hollered. Harry stood frozen for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No words came out. He just stood there, realizing he'd been completely outmaneuvered. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the studio, the door slamming behind him with a thunderous bang that echoed through the space. Bill turned back to the audience, a slight smile on his face. Well, that was fun. Remind me not to invite any more royals. The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking like a dam bursting open. Bill sat back down in his chair, straightening his jacket. You know, I've had some difficult guests over the years. Politicians who dodge questions, celebrities who are clearly high, authors who talk for 20 minutes without saying anything. But that was something special. The audience was eating it up, still buzzing from what they'd just witnessed. I mean, come on, Bill continued, his voice full of disbelief. He came on the show, insulted America, insulted me, insulted all of you, and then acted like he was the victim. That takes a special kind of delusion. More laughter and applause. And the thing is, Bill said, leaning forward, I actually felt bad for the guy when he first sat down. I really did. I know his life hasn't been easy. I know he's been through some tough stuff. But somewhere along the way, he forgot that other people have problems too. He forgot that being rich and famous doesn't mean you get to act like everyone owes you something. The audience nodded in agreement, completely on Bill's side. Look, Bill said, his tone becoming more serious. I believe in treating people with respect. I believe in giving everyone a fair shot. But respect goes both ways. You can't come onto someone's show in someone's country and spend the whole time telling them how terrible they are. That's not how it works. Someone in the audience shouted, "Tell him, Bill." Bill grinned. Oh, I think I did. Pretty sure he got the message. The laughter rolled through the studio in waves. And you know what the funny thing is? Bill continued. He talked about dignity, about honor, about tradition, but then he threw a tantrum like a toddler who didn't get his way. That's not dignified. That's not honorable. That's just sad." The audience applauded again, clearly fired up. "But here's what really gets me," Bill said, his voice taking on a more thoughtful tone. He said I hide behind comedy, that I use jokes to avoid real criticism. But comedy is how I deal with real criticism. Comedy is how I process the insanity of the world. And yeah, sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it hits too close to home. But that's the point. That's why it matters. A few people in the audience clapped in appreciation of the sentiment. "Harry wanted me to treat him like royalty," Bill said. "But this is America. We don't do royalty here. We don't bow. We don't curtsy. We treat people based on who they are, not what family they were born into. And if you can't handle that, then maybe California isn't the place for you." The audience erupted once more, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. Bill looked directly into the camera, his expression both amused and sincere. "So Harry, if you're watching this, and I have a feeling you will be, here's my message. You're welcome back anytime. But next time, maybe check your ego at the door. Maybe remember that you're a guest, not the star. And maybe, just maybe, try to remember that the rest of us have feelings too." The studio shook with applause and cheers. Bill soaked it in for a moment, then raised his hands to quiet everyone down. All right, he said with a smile. "We've still got a show to do. Let's bring out our next guest, someone who actually knows how to have a conversation without throwing a fit." The band started playing, the audience kept cheering, and Bill Maher sat there with the satisfied smile of someone who just won a battle he never asked for, but absolutely dominated. Backstage, producers scrambled to figure out what had just happened. Crew members whispered to each other in disbelief. Camera operators replayed the footage, making sure they'd captured every explosive second. In the makeup room, Bill's team surrounded him during the commercial break, everyone talking at once. "That was incredible," one producer said, barely able to contain his excitement. "Did you see his face when you made that ratings joke?" Another added, laughing. Bill just nodded, taking it all in. "Yeah, that got him good. But honestly, I didn't want it to go that way. I really didn't." "Are you kidding?" the producer replied. "This is going to be everywhere tomorrow. Every news outlet, every social media platform. This is massive." Bill sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but still, I prefer when guests can actually handle a conversation like adults." "Well, you handled it perfectly," someone else chimed in. "You stayed calm. You stayed rational. You made him look like the unreasonable one." "Because he was the unreasonable one," Bill said matter-of-factly. "I asked him normal questions. He's the one who decided to turn it into World War III. The makeup artist touched up his face while he talked, preparing him for the rest of the show. "Do you think he'll respond?" someone asked. Bill shrugged. "Probably. He'll probably go on some podcast or write some statement about how I ambushed him or disrespected him or whatever. That's what people do these days. They can't just admit they screwed up." "Let him," the producer said confidently. "The footage speaks for itself. Anyone who watches this will see exactly what happened." Bill nodded, knowing it was true. "All right, let's get back out there. We've got a show to finish." As he walked back onto the stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation. He waved them down, trying to get back to business. But they kept clapping. They kept cheering. They were on his side completely. Okay, Bill finally said, laughing. "Seriously, we have to keep going, or we'll be here all night." The audience settled down, and Bill launched into his next segment with the same sharp wit and intelligence he always brought. But everyone in that room knew they'd just witnessed something special. Something that would be talked about for a long time. In living rooms across the country, viewers sat glued to their screens, immediately texting friends and family about what they'd just seen. Social media exploded with clips, reactions, and hot takes. Everyone had an opinion. Some people defended Harry, claiming Bill had been too harsh, but most people saw it the way the studio audience had seen it. An entitled guest who couldn't handle basic questions and lashed out when challenged. Bill Maher had done what he always did. He asked tough questions. He pushed back against nonsense. He refused to bow down to someone just because of their title or status. And in doing so, he'd created one of the most memorable moments in talk show history. Not because he wanted drama, not because he planned it, but because he stayed true to himself while someone else completely fell apart. That's what happens when royalty meets reality. That's what happens when someone used to deference encounters actual accountability. That's what happens when you walk into Bill Maher's house thinking you can say whatever you want without consequences. You get shown the door. Simple as that.